I'm Louis Contey, director with Shattered Globe Theater.
I'm Larry Grimm, actor, playing Abraham Lincoln in Shattered Globe's The Heavens Are Hung in Black.
Thank you for listening to Author's Voice.
It's the place you want to be.
Good afternoon. Welcome to A House Divided, brought to you by Author's Voice. I'm Daniel Weinberg, and we're sitting here in our broadcast studio at the Abraham Lincoln Bookshop in Chicago. Author's Voice is a virtual book signing network. We bring in authors and their latest books, and we interview them with knowledgeable hosts, and you're able to interact with us by sending in questions while we're live. Go back to the archive. You can always see them later that way. And also you can purchase a book or seven signed to build up a library and give out to other historical buffs or whatever else we're in, because we're in many, many genres. Today we're going to do something a bit differently, though. We're going to be showing you, telling you of a play here in Chicago that we think all of you really, if you're in the area, should go and see before it's gone. It was a play originally commissioned for the reopening of Ford's Theater back in 2009 after an extensive renovation back to its original state. And the play is at Shattered Globe Theater. It's called The Heavens Are Hung in Black by Pulitzer Prize nominee James Still and directed by Louis Contey. And a wonderful cast. We'll meet one of them, the prime one, in a moment. So we hope that you will see this. It's from September 7th until October 21st. And you can go to shatteredglobe.org and get tickets that way, or even call them, I guess, at 773-975-8150. And it only goes to October 21st, so do it now. Well, here we have with us both the director of the play, Louis Contey, and Mr. Lincoln, Lawrence Grimm. I'm going to ask each of you in turn, tell us of your background and how you got to this play.
My background, I'm a director, and I've been a director for 34 years. I come from New Jersey, and I've been a company member at Shattered Globe on and off for the past 25 years. And how I came to this play is a very long story. I'm a great Lincoln fan. My father was a history teacher, and I had grown a great love for Lincoln from a childhood. When I was in the 4th grade, I wrote a play and a book and illustrated it about Lincoln. And I'd had a great desire to do a play about Lincoln ever since, and I went on the hunt for many, many years to find one. I thought about writing one myself, and I did not have much success with that. And then I came across James Still's play about 4 years ago. I read it and immediately knew that it was something I wanted to do. It spoke to a lot of different things inside me, and I decided that this is something I'm going to push for.
Well, if I'd known about that book illustrated by you, I'd have had it right here to show. Right. So bring it to the play so we can all see it. Larry, why don't you tell us of your background and how you got to this, besides being Lincoln?
Sure. I've been an actor and teaching artist, which is essentially, sharing the wisdom and joy of our theater and public schools around Chicago for 25 years. I'm a founding ensemble member of a small theater company, storefront theater company called Red Orchid Theater, where I met Lou, but had admired his work prior to then. He directed me in a show there. And I split my time between teaching young people theater and acting. And Lou and Sandy Shinner, who's producing artistic director of Shattered Globe, contacted me in the fall about this piece, and I said, is this an audition, an offer, or somewhere in between? And Sandy said, well, there's only so many tall, talented, melancholy actors in Chicago. But after a rigorous audition process led by Lou and Sandy, I found myself trying to fit in these big shoes.
Yeah, we're all trying to do that. If nothing else, we're all, as I'm fond of saying, hanging on to his long coattails for dear life. Gives us, all of us, something to do. The playwright is not here, James Still. Could you tell us a bit about him, just so our audience knows whom he is?
Well, James is, of course, a playwright. He is a resident artist and Indiana rep, and he has written many plays. He's worked all over the country. And I came to know him specifically through this play. He and I and Sandy kind of corresponded via email. Sandy had worked with him previously at American Blues Theater here in Chicago a few years ago. But Sandy hooked me up with him, and he and I talked a lot about the play. I had the opportunity to meet him for the first time just as we were beginning rehearsals. And I immediately found a rapport with him, obviously having an interest in Lincoln. His interests weren't necessarily in Lincoln to start with. He also had a feeling for history, and he was commissioned to write the play, and he dived into
2009.
2009. Actually, I think the commission was in 2005. It took him several years to write it and to research it. And then once it was produced, he brought it to Indiana Rep following the Ford's Theater production. And it was at that point that I found the play. I found it online. I Googled some information about Lincoln and found that there was this script out there. And I really met him for the first time the first weekend of the rehearsal process. And we hit it off. And his writing is wonderful. It's lyric, it's poetic, it's profound. And I loved every word in it. And at one point, I was thinking, well, maybe does the play need any trimming? Does it need any cutting? And Sandy seemed to suggest, well, maybe we should talk to James about it. And I read it again, and I said to myself, this play doesn't need any help from me.
There goes one of my questions.
I need to try to stage
there.
it.
Yeah, all right. Now, the central issue of the play, which I've read into now, so I have an idea about it, and I've didn't meet anyone I didn't know, but that's nice. It's nice to be home. So what is the central issue? Why was the war fought? Was it for Union? Was it for slavery? Combination? Something else? What is that to the play? What's that central issue?
I think the central issue really comes down to moral leadership and moral responsibility. That's what Lincoln is wrestling with in trying to make the decision to write the Emancipation Proclamation. His views were similar to those of people of his time. They were things that we would probably cringe at today, but he knew that slavery was wrong, and he knew that he needed to find a way to elevate the purpose of the war, and that way he felt was going to be possibly emancipation. He spent a lot of time researching colonization, which was a theory of relocating African slaves to Liberia in Africa, and he looked at every possible way of ending the war.
Compensation.
Was another. Yeah.
Buying out the South.
Buying out the South. He would have done virtually anything short of surrender in order to end the war. After the first year of the war, he realized how bad the carnage was, and he felt that he needed to find some way to end it as quickly as possible, and he needed a solution. And emancipation began to grow in his imagination as a possibility. And it's something that he struggled with, and the play is really the story of that struggle.
Yeah, and of course it's a war measure, and a bill of lading, as one of your characters, Seward, may say in here. Mm-hmm. So it was a controversial thing, certainly, but they thought they had the power to do that, and we'll talk about a book that goes along with this that we'll show our audience a little bit later on if they'd like to have further education. Two things before I go on I want to get through. One is that in a preface to the play, I saw that that Lincoln's works, 18,000, were more than perhaps anyone else save Jesus. I would say as an historical figure, probably Napoleon is number one. Every country, was invaded by him, and they were happy to get rid of him and talk about it. So that's number one. And Lincoln, I think, after that. Jesus, Shakespeare on two different areas, I think. Something I just, because got to me the moment I saw it. When Ward Lamon first talked to you, Mr. Lincoln, he called you Abe. And I just startled back because as you have in the play, the president does say, call me Lincoln here and there, but it was interesting to see Ward doing that since he came from Illinois with him. I would have said Lincoln. So how has that reference to Abe gone over? Why, do you think that's appropriate for a play to say that?
I think part of what James might have been up to in that moment is trying to contextualize for non-historical folks an intimacy between the two that we could relate to. So even though the appropriate term might have been Lincoln, and something that Lou really helped us on, and I think is in the play, is that there is a kinship, friendship, connection to Springfield, and that Lincoln feels completely displaced in a Washington that is being built as he's presiding over the White House. So I think, in modern audiences and with references, we think first names are probably the way in. But and then there's
mollified.
I think then there's the added thing too that Lincoln, as other presidents may have done, appointed folks that were in his inner circle, and there is this idea of him presiding over trying to protect the president, and it's not just an official duty, but it becomes sort of an emotional, vulnerable connection as well in the play.
Yeah, very good point. Well, and that gets me to this. I've heard of the term documentary theater, and although it may relate more to our contemporary times, or a contemporary time for the theater of that, but is there any kinship of that documentary theater to inform the audience that way, or is this more of an historical drama, more akin to Shakespeare? Where do we put this play, would you think?
I think James's intent is to put it more in the realm of Shakespeare. In the preface to the script, the printed script, he says that he doesn't want it to be documentary theater, and that's one of the traps and one of the failings in many cases with this kind of historical drama, is that it ends up being documentary theater in some way. But he wanted Lincoln to be seen as a living, breathing human being. He wanted him to be taken seriously with flaws and all, as a man who had decisions to make. So I don't think it's in the intent of the play to be any kind of history so much as this is a man in this time and place with these decisions to make. He is flawed in character, as many of us are, and has the weight of all of these lives and the nation on his shoulders, and did the best that he could. James also places the play in this time frame in Lincoln's presidency in 1862, in part because of what's happened to him in his personal life. His son, Willie, 11 years old, dies maybe a month before the actions of the play, and he is profoundly affected by that in the way that any father would be. And in the midst of that grief, he's also fighting a national war, a civil war, and having to put all of those deaths into context with his own grief.
Yeah, positively. Well, but documentary theater is, to an extent, an invitation for a conversation, certainly with the audience. Something you're doing, by the way, and I'll be doing with you on October 8th, Sunday, after the matinee. I'll be at the theater, and we'll have a discussion of the play and other aspects of fact and fantasy, perhaps. But how do you then use historical facts versus the fiction and fantasy that a play needs? How do you reconcile yourself to that? Spielberg said, when he was confronted with some of these things, that I'm a movie maker, not an historian. Although he was saying on the side that everything is correct. Well, okay, almost. But nonetheless, how does one play fantasy, which a play needs, next to the historical facts? Even as an actor.
Yeah, I would say by virtue of the fact that it is the drama that Lou outlined, it's required. You know, I was sharing with you earlier as I look around your great library here, how I will continually feel that I should have done more research and could have done more research. And the question then becomes, if I had read 16,000 volumes and completed all of it, would that make any difference in terms of how Lincoln is represented and presented? And as an actor, you know, research and being in character, especially a historical character who is real, you have a certain obligation. But at a certain point, you have to separate myth from man and humanity from facts, and recognizing, I think, that the play sort of demands an interpretation, not just based on facts and history, but on what would it have been like to have been in this situation at this time with all the things that have occurred.
What's interesting is it's maybe impossible to really know Mr. Lincoln. His contemporaries all said afterward that they had him surrounded, they didn't know who he was, really, at the core. From Speed to Lamon, all of them were like that. But James Till, the playwright, did say that working with Lincoln made him, the playwright, feel more human. And I think that's perhaps what you're really getting at here, the humanity and how what would we do in a situation like that as well, especially if we could tweet at 3 a.m. about what he was doing in Emancipation. So, in other words, a flawed human. I once had a signature of Lincoln where he misspelled his name, the only time he had ever done that. And I used to show it to kids, especially because here is the man who wrote the Gettysburg Address in the second inaugural, yet he also misspells his name. So all of us who are, as you've said, flawed as humans, if we can grow and learn, we can perhaps ourselves produce a Gettysburg Address.
In adding on to that, you know, I think the nature of Lincoln being an ambiguous challenge in terms of understanding who he really was. There's a reference in the play that I think is historical about that, where Whitman shares how hard it is to paint this man, to capture his essence. There are certain qualities that you can really land on, connect to, and hold on to, and one of them is just that he's enjoyed people. There is a backbone of moral leadership and a connection to recognizing his own foibles.
Let me ask each of you this. You know, there are symphony conductors who refuse to listen to other recordings of things that they're going to be doing, or maybe even when they're young. They don't want to be influenced by another conductor. How did two of you come to this play not being influenced by, say, Spielberg's movie or Daniel Day-Lewis? Did Daniel Day-Lewis have an impact on how you do it today? Would it have been better if you had not seen it at all, for instance?
I watched Daniel Day-Lewis repetitively every day. I just wake up and try. I'm trying my best to emulate and do an imitation of his interpretation, and it's not working so far.
You stay in character like he did? The consternation of all the rest?
Everyone calls me Mr. Lincoln backstage, and if it's anything different, I storm off and take 10 minutes to myself. No, seriously, I think James, again, in the preface, had talked about how he had made a determined effort to not focus on certain historical texts because it would color his vision, and I think it's a really great balancing act he's done. As much as it's not documentary theater, there are core historical things that are being shared in this play that ground the humanity and help tell the story. But he avoided, I think, for his own sake, of creating the Lincoln on the text that was authentic to his vision and his imagination. And then, as far as I'm concerned, I had seen the movie, and I think it's sometimes overestimated how much of an influence somebody can have over you, or how much previous interpretations can. I think it's useful.
So how did you prepare yourself and get inside that head?
Literally through understanding the circumstances and the emotional relationships that this play is anchored in. The loss of Willie, the idea that he is fighting to define the Civil War on his own terms of keeping the Union together when he can't possibly do that, and has visitations from everyone from John Brown to Dred Scott, who are trying to get him to see a different perspective. Mary Todd as a person who he's in love with, and in his own words, engraved on her ring, love is eternal. And I think it's...
When we get into writing, he's a lawyer.
Yeah, and it's hard to deny the truth of that in this. There were so many human, simple things to anchor yourself in that the play and Lou and the cast that we have made it very easy to do it.
So Lou, since you didn't change the play, how did you change what the visuals were, what we saw, and how it is viewed? Is it different than what it was in Ford's Theater in '09? It must be to some extent.
I have no doubt that it is vastly different. The scale of it, for one thing, is much, much smaller. It's a more intimate space, so you have to approach your audience in a more intimate fashion. I don't know whether or not they used projections at Ford's Theater. My guess is they probably did not, but they probably had something akin to it. But we knew that we wanted to approach our audience in a small space. We knew that intimacy, one of the things that guided me while I was crafting the work was the opportunity that it would provide an audience to sit in the same room with Abraham Lincoln. That more than anything guided what we did, how it looked, and how it moved through the space. I wanted the audience to feel that they were in the room with Lincoln because it's such a rare opportunity. And on a larger stage, I wouldn't have had that opportunity. I wouldn't have been able to create that. But I also wanted to be inside Lincoln's head as much of the time as I could. So any of the visuals, any of the projections, the way that it's lit, needed to give us a sense of what was going on in Lincoln's mind at any point in the play, at any point in the storytelling. So, the scale of those things had to be simple, and they had to be focused, and they had to be very, very specific. The kinds of things that you could perceive in your own mind's eye watching the play. It's kind of a waking dream, and Lincoln suffered terribly from insomnia. So he didn't necessarily fall asleep and have a dream. Things would come to him in his waking state that weren't always realistic. And in the play, that's how he learns, that's how he evolves, and that's how his ideas about the Emancipation Proclamation evolve. So in staging the play and in creating what we saw visually, I was guided mostly by the opportunity to sit in the same room with Lincoln and what I thought was going on behind his eyes.
Well, as the son of a psychoanalyst, I'm wondering if he's delusional. Can't wait till you get back into that. DJ in Chicago, thank you very much has sent in this question. I have tickets to see The Heavens Are Hung in Black. Can't wait. I noticed that the same theater, Theater Wit, where we are, is producing another different play about the Civil War. Are history plays getting more popular these days, such as Hamilton?
It's
or
possible.
Maybe because of Hamilton?
I think.
Thank you, DJ.
I think the possibility of history becoming more interesting or more stage-worthy is a good one, an interesting idea. We're in a very strange place right now, to say the least, and how we are processing what things are happening in the country and in our communities. We need context, and I think on some level, history gives us the context. In some cases, it shows us cautionary tales. In other cases, it shows us how extraordinary people overcame extraordinary circumstances and taught themselves and others how to cope with it and how to move forward and how to treat other people. Mm-hmm. And one of the things about Lincoln that I have learned in the play and through my research is that he's a man of great empathy. And without that empathy, he could not have accomplished what he did. He could not have got us through the Civil War, written the Emancipation Proclamation, crafted the words for the Gettysburg Address. He would not have brought us through the war as he did. Only one person could have done that. I feel very seriously that he was placed there by fate, and because he had that gift of empathy. And I think history needs those kinds of figures, and we need to examine them in order to figure out how to navigate these troubled times.
Yeah, and I would add that, with respect to that question, the present is really, because it is such a peculiar time politically and in America, I think that our history, it's always relevant, but in contrast to the present, it becomes really an interesting comparison. For example, there's a moment in the play where Lincoln is considering the idea of weighing in on something personally. He says, does the presidency confer on me, does the presidency confer on me the right to act upon a personal judgment, upon a feeling? We are a country of laws, no matter the feeling. The fact that the 16th president is contemplating something that our current would never is fascinating to me. The idea that a president can weigh in on anything at any time about his most, and have a judgment that's personal. Lincoln was considering that as that taboo. It's not even thought about today. So the contrast to me is fascinating.
I think if we're really, strangely enough, personally, I think if we're really going to remember Lincoln in the tricentennial of his birth, it's nice that he kept the Union together. I think it's great that he took slavery and got that out. But it was really the nationalization of slavery, for one, that he stopped. That's really what I think was the thing that fomented the entire, everything else, the war and everything else after that. But it was his humanity. What we can learn from him as a character, as a person, is what I think is really going to remember. He's someone that we can all emulate, and I think your play shows that. If we really, you're going to find yourself brought into him as a person, as you're saying, and I think that's probably the most important thing that can come out of a play like this. Let's jump to death. It's really imbued. There are numbers of players in here besides Stanton and Mary. There's death, there's emancipation. There's so many issues that are there, personal issues. But death is certainly one that permeates the play. What is Willie's role in the play as maybe imbuing with some sort of feeling, perhaps? What was that?
Well, Willie brings death home in a very palpable way. Lincoln has seen the numbers of the dead, all of the reports from the battlefield, and on some level that can be very abstract, it can be existential, but his son's mortality really drives home the humanity of what he's doing and how he must conduct himself. His conscience bothers him. That's part of the core of the play, the fact that he's sending men off to die, and that he needs to justify why, that it has to be something more than just politics. It has to be something more than that's just national pride. It needs to be something higher. It needs to be something more profound. And he had always had a distaste and a hatred for slavery and all things related to it. He could not justify it in any context, but the lives that were being lost at the time really began to mount on his conscience. The play quotes Shakespeare quite a bit. He quotes Macbeth quite a bit. And on some level, Lincoln equates himself with Macbeth in the sense that all of those deaths are keeping him from his humanity, that they're keeping him from being able to execute his job, be a good parent, that in some way, shape, or form, he's become less and less of a human being because he sanctions so many lives to be lost in battle. And Willie's death really is the touchstone for that. It brings it right home. He died in the White House. He died on a night when they were having a ball, and that Mary and Lincoln had to kind of tag team back and forth in and out of the sick room. And he had to put on one face to go downstairs and another face to come upstairs. And it profoundly affected him. It changed him. It changed how he saw the war. It changed how he saw death.
There's a line that's connected to what Lou was saying. Death is an intimate companion, and there's nothing metaphorical about that. And I think there was something really literal in the sense that Lou shared with us during rehearsal. It's like that again, in contrast between present times and how we mourn, how we relate to death. It's unusual, wasn't it, that Lincoln got inside Willie's grave at one point, had it opened, and his comfort level with, or his sort of acceptance of death, as challenging as it was, I feel like, wholehearted and full-throated acceptance of what it was, what it meant, not only for the loss of the soldiers, but for his own personal losses. It was just a wide open heart there.
One of the books that we're going to mention at the end of the show today that reflect the themes of the play is Lincoln in the Bardo. And we had George Saunders here sitting in a chair, and we talked to him for an hour about that play. Did you read that book prior to the play, by chance?
It sits by my bedside table. Mm-hmm. I have not touched on it yet.
Then wait maybe to the end.
Yeah.
I'm about halfway through it.
Mm-hmm.
It is a lot more than I wanted to invest in while I was in the rehearsal process. It's very powerful.
You have to invest in it.
Yeah, it's very. It's not an easy read, especially if you're dealing with Lincoln already in a different context, and it is very moving and very painful. And I'm a parent myself, and the notion of a child dying and the grief that would follow is unfathomable. So it's a little difficult to get through it because of that. But I have every intention of going through.
Now,
the whole book.
I'm a parent who lost a child, and it was difficult getting through. But I don't know. I felt akin on every page to what was going on, and I think it brought to the fore much of what I felt inside me. So for that, it's very true to the issue at hand in there. Dreams also are a great, as you mentioned before, a great part of this play, and delusional or not. One that sticks out, I haven't seen the program. I don't know if the Byron, The Dream, is in the program. I think it is. And that is beautiful and insightful. And if you go and see this play, which you should, by the way, let's just say, by the way, Shattered Globe Theater, and September 7th to October 21st. Go to shatteredglobe.org to get tickets. I think you're going to enjoy this play as much as I have getting prepared for this. But you need to read Byron just beforehand. It's insightful and beautiful both. Just to start it out for you, sleep hath its own world, a boundary between the things misnamed death and existence. Sleep has its own world. He goes on. Like symbols of the future, they have power, the tyranny of pleasure and of pain. They make us what we were not, and they will, and shake us with the vision that's gone by, the dread of vanished shadows. So this was a wonderful piece to have entering into reading the script, and I think people should do that when they come to the play.
It's a great framework.
So tell us about the plays. What is their true significance? I think you mentioned a little bit, but just give me another phrase or two. And so when people go and they see Lincoln having these wonderful visions that come before him, painful as many of them are, what happens to us?
Well, hopefully we're taken on a journey in a place we never expected to be. One, inside of Lincoln's mind. Two, in the midst of the Civil War. And three, on a journey of self-discovery and a sense of how to touch our own empathy. I'd like to think that an audience will walk away from the play not only learning more about Lincoln, but understanding what the burden of responsibility is at that level and how Lincoln is unique in that context and how he is, I think he is a special individual. He is a special person, not just because he was president, but because he felt the way he did, because he spoke the way he did, and because he led the country through that moment in time and no one else could have.
I think we're very lucky that we have had him there, truly. I don't know what would have happened without that. I didn't want to try to think about what the country. We could have had some businessman as president or something with that.
Hannibal Hamlin.
Hannibal Hamlin. Well, that would have had at least 2, maybe 3 countries come out of that. Emancipation. That's the other part of this play, and which is still a palpable issue today, it seems. This play is palpable to us as well. There are, during the time, there were numbers of Emancipation Proclamations that were printed up for consumers. This one by Pratt actually took the words and then wrote them out so you could see Lincoln's head in it. But we happen to have right behind me 2 wonderful pieces that were done, probably the most imaginative of the day. And this first one that we're looking at was made by a printer named Dimmick. And again, the text, as you'll see in the center, is the text of the Emancipation Proclamation. They all had that. And then you'll see, as we're going down here, the left portrays slavery, whipping scene, auctions, bloodhound scene. And then on the right, they portray the freedmen, post-emancipation, agricultural scenes, school scenes, steamboat scenes, and of course Lincoln in the middle of it at the bottom there. The second one that we have was made in Milwaukee, printed in Madison during the war. All of these are during the war. And these were made for consumers who wanted to put this up on their wall. This is a highly spirited Western edition that again was embellished with large slave scenes on the left and 4 freedom scenes on the right. So emancipation is a major actor here. You didn't have to go out and find the actor, there it was. Talk to me a bit about emancipation, how it felt to be Lincoln in emancipation.
I wish it could be as clean and clear-cut as those contrasting images. It'd be great to do a document where on one side we have that strife and pain and loss, and on the other side there's freedom and joy. I think our current environment and situation makes this play relevant in a way that we didn't expect. It was written, as you mentioned, right after Obama was elected, and had a certain without giving away the play, it has there are certain moments, particularly in the end, that have poignancy for different periods of time. With the understanding that we're not living in a post-racial America, I'd like to say that Lincoln knew in some ways, I'd like to believe that Lincoln knew in some ways that the Emancipation Proclamation wasn't the end-all and be-all. He has a line in the play that he shares with the secretary, John Hay, and says, "Being free doesn't make them equal, John." And you could say that that's Scott foresight with reference to freeing the slaves. It was a really important step, as Lou let us know in rehearsal, and I think it's got historical validity. Our world wouldn't be the same without it, but it did not do nearly as much as it needed to do. And was politically expedient for him at the time. It gave the cause to the Civil War that it didn't have before. And there are contradictions, human ones, that I think are really evident. On one side, Lincoln says to Dred Scott in the play, "There was never a time that I was not against slavery." And yet the entire play is about how hard and how long it takes for him to get to the moment of signing the Emancipation Proclamation. So it's a mixed bag for sure in terms of its power.
We have a question that came in. I'm sorry I can't shout out to you. You didn't give us your name and where you're from. But briefly, can you comment on the significance of the scene where Lincoln wanders into the Shakespeare rehearsal? This is someone who must have seen the play at this point.
Well, it's just full of irony. And it's the scene when I read the play that really cinched it for me, in part because I won't give anything away, but there's a rehearsal of Henry V that's going on when Lincoln arrives in the midst of a rainstorm in need of shelter. And the play, Henry V, allows Lincoln on some level to confront his own inability to make decisions without having to chew over them incessantly, and the real depth and meaning of what it means to be the supreme leader, as it were, of a nation at war. Hamlet is also quoted, the to be or not to be speech is referenced, and it's Lincoln unknowingly or unwittingly realizes that he is the same man as Hamlet, unable to make a decision without having to chew it over and understand it from every particular angle, and yet that gives him what Lincoln calls the slows, the inability to make a choice, the need for constant deliberation. But he eventually comes to a different understanding in quoting Henry V's speech in the scene, "But if the cause be not good," he recognizes the fact that it is all on him. It's no one else's responsibility. And in that scene, we taste the irony of a human being who deplores violence and war and whose job it is to wage it full-throated.
You know, he was not a war president. He was a president who had war thrust upon him, although he was willing and able to go into it at that point and not kick it down the road it had been since the Constitution, for that matter. There are a couple of books that reflect on the themes of the play, as I mentioned. One of them is Burris Carnahan's Act of Justice, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the Law of War, because those are inextricably linked to each other. And the other one, which I also mentioned before, was George Saunders' Lincoln in the Bardo, a play that he says is a novel, but to me it's a play. If you want to see the interview that we had here with him, you can go to authorsvoice.net, which you're on now, and go to previous shows and scroll down, and you can see our interview of Saunders. Both of these reflect truly the issues, and strongly. I think you'll see one is a novel and the other one is history, and that's what this is the fusion of in this play. Now, the play, again, I'm just going to mention it so you don't forget it. It's the Shattered Globe Theater. The play is The Heavens Are Hung in Black, and it's September 7th through October 21st. And you can go to shatteredglobe.org. And the 21st, unless, of course, you flock to it, and it has to be extended, and then you're going to have Abe Lincoln a little longer. And so I hope that you actually do. We have other House Divided shows coming up very soon, and there's going to be much on Grant this fall especially, including Ron Chernow and his book on Grant. So sign up, come to the website, stay here and come, or sign up right now for future shows so you'll know who's coming in. And we have shows in many, many genres, Author's Voice does, not just in Lincoln, the Civil War, and the presidency, but in fiction, historical fiction too, mystery, sci-fi, children's books are wonderful. I think you'd enjoy that, mystery, and even romance. We even have shows in that. So I want to thank both of you coming and sharing your play with us today, and I truly hope everyone comes and sees this. I think this gives us a depth now that you can come to it with some understanding, and then afterwards have a conversation with yourself or others about what was in. I thank everyone here at the shop who has made this possible, the technical crew, and we couldn't do it without them. So do come back to authorsvoice.net. We appreciate your being at a House Divided. Come back again. Thank you.